Have you ever heard of a military defeat so crushing it should have been the end of the story? Well, today we're talking about one that somehow became the founding myth of a global superpower. This is the incredible and brutal story of China's Long March.
So let's just try to get a sense of the scale here. We're in 1934, and you have this group of nearly 100,000 people. This is the heart and soul of the Chinese Communist Party's Red Army. And look, this wasn't just an army. This was the entire future of their movement.
And they were in deep, deep trouble. Completely surrounded by a rival army more than 3 times their size, the Nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek. This wasn't just a bad spot on a map. This was checkmate. They were facing total and complete annihilation.
So what do? Well, their only option was to try and punch a hole in the line and just run. And this was not some brilliant planned retreat. No way. This was a desperate, year-long scramble for survival across China's most brutal landscapes. We're talking treacherous mountains, deadly rivers, and vast, unforgiving swamps.
The human cost was just unbelievable. Of that main group that started, fewer than 8,000 made it to the end. I mean, think about that. That's a loss rate of over 90%. So how on earth does a catastrophe of this magnitude become a legendary victory? Well, that's exactly what we're going to figure out.
All right, so let's back up a bit. How did the Red Army get into this impossible situation in the first place? To really get the story of the escape, you first have to understand the trap.
The big picture here is the Chinese Civil War. By 1931, the Communists, led by Mao, had actually managed to carve out their own little territory. Think of it as a state within a state, called the Jiangxi Soviet. But here's the twist, and this is absolutely crucial. Just before this whole crisis kicked off, Mao himself had been sidelined. He was pushed out of power. His guerrilla tactics were seen as the wrong move, and he was replaced by new leaders who wanted to fight more traditional, face-to-face battles.
And this leadership change, it played right into the nationalist hands. Their leader, Chiang Kai-shek, with some advice from a German military consultant, launched what he called his 5th encirclement campaign. Instead of chasing ghosts in the countryside, he started building a massive, suffocating ring of fortified bunkers. It was like building a cage, brick by brick, slowly squeezing the life out of the communist base.
So by October of 1934, that cage was almost complete. The walls were closing in, the communist base was collapsing, and it really looked like the end was near. The leadership had one and only one choice left. They had to make a break for it. The whole breakout was planned in complete secrecy by a guy named Zhou Enlai. Almost 100,000 people start this mad dash, but disaster strikes almost right away. At the Battle of the Chiang River, they get caught, and they are just completely hammered. It was an absolute bloodbath.
And yeah, this chart really tells the story. In just a little over a month, the army lost more than half of its soldiers. They plummeted from 86,000 down to just 36,000. And it wasn't just battle casualties. Morale was so crushed that soldiers were just giving up and deserting in huge numbers.
So you can imagine, this wasn't just a military disaster. It was a complete crisis of leadership. And in the middle of all that chaos, the guy who had been pushed to the side, Mao Zedong, he saw his chance.
I mean, the guys in charge at this point, they had zero credibility left. Their whole strategy of fighting these big, conventional battles had led the army straight to ruin. So Mao jumps in and basically says, look, this is insane. We have to stop running straight into a brick wall. He argued they should ditch the old plan, go back to guerrilla tactics, and head for a province where he knew the enemy was weaker.
With what was left of the army totally shattered and morale at rock bottom, the leaders huddled together in a captured city called Zunyi. In January 1935, they held this big emergency meeting to figure out what went so terribly wrong. But listen, this wasn't just a debriefing. Oh no. This was a political showdown for the soul of the Communist Party.
And when the dust settled, the old leaders, Bo Gui and Otto Braun, they were out. They took the blame and were stripped of their command. And Mao? Well, with the crucial support of the very influential Zhou Enlai, he was brought back in. Now, officially, he was just Xiu's assistant, but let's be real. From this point on, he was the one running the show. His political gamble paid off. Big time.
Okay, so with Mao calling the shots now, the whole vibe of this retreat just completely changes. They threw the old map in the trash. This was no longer about getting from point A to point B. This was now a totally unpredictable, desperate race for survival, fighting not just enemy soldiers, but Mother Nature herself.
In the hardships they faced from here on out, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. They were crossing massive rivers, climbing snow-covered mountain passes at insane altitudes, and dragging themselves through these vast, disgusting, disease-filled swamps. All while being starved, frozen, and constantly attacked by everyone from nationalist armies to local warlords.
One of the most legendary stories you'll hear is about the battle for the Luding Bridge. The tale goes that soldiers heroically charged across the bridge's bare iron chains while under heavy machine gun fire. It's an incredible story, but it's also important to know that many historians today believe the difficulty of that battle was seriously exaggerated for propaganda.
And, it wasn't just outside forces they were fighting. They were also fighting each other. At one point, Mao's ragged group meets up with another, much bigger Red Army force, and right away, a power struggle breaks out with its leader, a guy named Zhang Gutao. They couldn't agree on anything, so they ended up splitting up. And later, Zhang's larger army was pretty much wiped out, which, ironically, just made Mao's own path to power even clearer. And here is where you see the political genius at work. Even while this is all happening, while they are literally running for their lives, Mao is already writing the myth. He's framing this disastrous retreat not as a failure, but as a heroic announcement to the world. He's turning this story of near death into a powerful piece of propaganda, in real time. All right, so the survivors finally find a safe place to land. How does this brutal, horrific retreat get transformed into the legendary founding story of a nation? Let's take a look at the legacy. So finally, in October 1936, a full year after this whole thing started, the battered, exhausted survivors of the Red Armies managed to meet up in the northern province of Shanxi. The journey was finally over. They had a safe place to rest, to regroup, and most importantly, to survive.
And this is where the reality and the myth really start to go their separate ways. Take the distance, for example. Mao famously claimed they marched 12,500 kilometers. But when British researchers actually retraced the route back in 2003, they found it was closer to 6,000 kilometers. That huge difference kind of tells you everything you need to know about how the facts got bent to fit the legend. So, what's the big takeaway here? By any military standard you can think of, the Long March was a total, catastrophic failure. But politically, it was a stunning success. It cemented Mao's absolute control over the party, it gave them the breathing room they needed to rebuild, and maybe most importantly, it created this powerful central myth of survival against all odds that is still the bedrock of modern China.
And that leaves us with this huge contradiction. Was the Long March a symbol of epic failure, a story of unbelievable loss? Or was it the ultimate story of survival? The truth, just like the march itself, is messy, it's complicated, and it's something people still argue about to this very day.